Okay, so we are here to do a sports science video conversation with Hoka. It is great to have Hoka here to talk with us. We do a lot of research at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas on shoes and not only testing of shoes, but testing of people running in shoes. I'm John Mercer, professor at University of Nevada, Las Vegas, also part of the Las Vegas Triathlon Club. And so this is great to talk with Hoka. And I'm going to do a quick, have you each do an introduction from Hoka. Thibaut, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So Thibaut Poupard, Senior Manager for Innovation at Hoka, and well, specifically for footwear. And my background is biomechanics and shoe engineering, and so I'm working mainly on what is advanced, but to introduce the new concepts and test them for Hoka.
Great, thank you.
My name's Al Tunstall. I'm a brand manager for Hoka. I've been with the company for 8 years, and my specialty is primarily working in the medical outreach field and also just helping in terms of brand management with a number of our independent retail groups.
Great, thanks, Al. And then we also have Alex, who is our communications person. And Alex, I want to introduce you as well, because I think what's important is, a company like Hoka, they have a wide variety of people that they hire. And it's not only just biomechanists, it's not only people who work on the front lines of sales, but it's also, communication and branding of a company. So I'll do a quick introduction for you as well. Thanks, Alex, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
So we're, and the rest of the attendees are UNLV students, masters and doctoral and recent doctoral graduate. So this is exciting. And then we do have the representative of Bob from Las Vegas Triathlon Club. So thanks everyone for joining us. So for the students, we have a wide variety of projects that we are running for shoe design. And I do need to provide a disclaimer here, because hopefully we'll be able to show this video at some point for classes. And the one thing to keep in mind when we start talking about running shoes is runners are highly susceptible to running overuse injuries. And we know if we take a group of runners, 25 to 75% of them may get an injury when they're prepping for a marathon. And, far too often, people may point to the shoe as a problem of causing an injury. And sometimes it's too much of credit is given to a shoe to prevent an injury. So, there may be people who have injuries, but we're not here to talk about those injuries or even to prescribe a shoe for them. People need to find the right shoe that works for them. And if someone's injured, they need to work with their healthcare team. And we're not going to make recommendations about shoes to address an injury from a medical perspective. But we are going to talk about innovations of shoe design. And we're also going to try to stay focused on the Hoka brand and talk about the innovation that Hoka has done, because that's really exciting. So with that, I'll do a quick introduction of how I came across Hoka. It was really back in the period where the shoe design had swung over to minimalist shoes or barefoot running. And we did some research projects on barefoot running and minimalist shoes. And then somewhere, and I can't actually remember where I heard or saw Hoka first, but I saw this, shoe that was far more cushion than what anyone was looking at using. And I went to the shoe store just to try it out and see what it was like. I said, wow, this is really interesting. And then I started looking into Hoka and the shoe brand, and the design of the shoe was really for trail runners initially, or at least that's what my understanding was. And it was neat to see a change in the shoe model from a minimalist all the way over to extreme cushion or maximum cushioning type shoe. And now, when you go to iron distance races, they do shoe counts, and Hoka is typically the top common shoe for endurance runners to use. So it's really neat to see in such a short period of time how Hoka has gone from entering the market to being a leader in the endurance community. So, and that's how I came across Hoka. And then we were interested in just answering a simple question of, is it harder to run in Hokas? Because that was anecdotally what was going around, is that the shoes were going to be heavier, they're going to be softer, they're going to be harder to run in. But we actually did a project, and it actually came up that running economy was not negatively influenced by wearing Hokas. And so that was neat to be at the forefront of some of the shoe design. But Thibaut, Al, anything you want to add to the Hoka story and how Hoka came around?
You want to jump in, Al, or?
Go ahead and I'll follow up with you.
Okay. So the brand was founded in France, in the French Alps, in 2009, and the project started from the idea was to solve a problem that was pretty simple. That was initially how to run downhill in an easier way or more comfortable, enjoyable way. The founders were all practicing a lot of mountain activities, running being one of them, but always experienced down enjoyable compared to some other sports, gravity oriented. And they started there actually, how to solve this problem. And by doing that, so it was then 2009, 2010, they were able to find a solution that was then discovered applicable as well to other fields, going up, going down, also on flat and device surfaces. So then there's obviously some adaptations to the shoe, to the way it's designed, the way it's manufactured, but the whole concept was kind of born from this big problem to solve. And so from there, then it evolved very quickly from what is niche ultra distance trail and then downhill trail running to road running right away, 2011, and from there within road and trail, we were able to then touch big set of groups, different runners, from triathletes to track athletes to road runners to trail runners, from short distances to long distances. But yeah, this is kind of a bit of context of how it started and what was the initial problem to solve.
That's great.
Yeah, and what I would add to that is, Hoka is a very experiential brand, and John, I think you touched on it. In the early days, we had some real struggles because the cosmetics of the shoe really worked against us, because customers walked in, especially in light of the minimalist timing, they just thought they'd fall off the shoe. And the reality is, with our insole construction and midsole construction, the reality was quite the opposite, and that is you're sitting in a bucket seat. And the challenge we had not only was that, but also encouraging and educating the sales staffs on the floor to learn how to sell the brand, because it wasn't an easy sale in the early years. But as like Thibaut said, as the brand evolved, cosmetics became different, the applications of the silhouettes became much more mainstream, then the brand was much easier to sell. But in the early days, it was more about, wow, that's a big shoe and I'm going to fall off of it and hurt myself, and that couldn't be farther from the truth.
That's a great point, because when we did one of our presentations early on with some of our work, I had some colleagues actually ask a question during my presentation about the possibility of twisting an ankle or something, because it looks like a high profile, but you're right, it's not. And that's what I explained is, well, this was really built for trail running initially, where it puts a lot of demand on subtalar and ankle joint.
And maybe to add to what Al was saying, and I think it's a perfect example of communication, the mass communication to the public, and also what we know by working like in development and engineering, but also in testing. And this is connecting with what you guys are doing at the labs, like being able to solve these problems that are inherent to the construction, like for any type of shoe, there's different problems to solve. But then being able to communicate it simply and in a very effective way to the public and to the running community is something different. So I think it was this challenge. The shoe was well thought. I mean, there's a lot of thoughts and testing and trials put into it, but at the same time, then you need to explain in a very simple way and then give confidence to people. So that's kind of the world we're living in. It's like anytime you have a concept that you develop, you need to make sure that this is easy to explain and for people to get it. Now it's a bit better for us for sure because we're a bit more well known and then we have a platform to express this. But in the days, it was just like a startup of passionate people that found a solution and they had to explain it. And it was different and it was looking challenging for some people, for sure.
Well, what's so neat about your company, and this is why I'm drawn to it, is because being an innovator is a bit of a risk taker. I mean, you entered the shoe market when it really was probably the peak of minimalist shoe running, and then you come out with this other shoe that looks dramatically different. But yet, there's a lot of other technology other than just the midsole thickness that the eye is drawn to. So maybe talk about some of the innovations that back then or even now that are built into the shoe.
So maybe I can start with the basics of what we explain. I mean, we have three main concepts that we are communicating around, and it's mainly, so it starts first with a rocker we call the meta rocker, which is actually a technical term that is coming from more the ski industry, but it's the rocker expresses like the curve of the shoe, either in the forefoot or in the heel. And the idea is that we want to help people to have a more efficient stance and to help them to have a heel to toe transition being a bit more efficient. So it's designed to try to help this transition and this rolling effect. The second piece, as you mentioned, is like having a thicker and oversized midsole that allows to have something, another foot comfort that is really enjoyable and comfortable, and that is managing the loads and the impacts differently than what the shoes were doing at that time. And then the last piece, what I was mentioning, is the bucket seat. Bucket seat is, well, we call it also active foot frame, which is the reality is that the foot is not on top of the shoe, but on the side.
Right.
And there is, it's just like rails and that are helping you to actually manage stability of the foot by being inside the midsole and on top of it. So that's kind of the basics. Then there is a lot of geometries that we can fine tune, because once I say that there is a curve of the midsole, then you can fine tune every angle, every dimension of it. It's just a principle, depending on then the usage, the distance, the surface, the type of runner. And this is how we are able then to fine tune, play with all these details to address the needs of different runners. Just to add maybe a bit more of a technical piece here, back to the context of 2010, what made this also available, and it's not only, Hoka was a precursor here, but it's something that is happening now everywhere, is that the materials evolved, and the foams specifically. The key piece to the Hoka shoes is that they are light, and the weight is a key component to performance. And that was always on the mind of the founders, but it's been like that ever since. It's like, it's not a heavier shoe, it's a shoe that is at the same weight or lighter, adding additional things. And this is only made possible with the quality of the materials and the evolution of these materials. So I think it's, in the story of innovation in general, there are some ideas that people have, but also it's made possible by what is available or soon to be available in the technical field. And this is where the polymer, I don't want to go into the details of the foam constructions themselves, but just in general, we're able to have compounds that are lighter and softer and in a consistent way, should I say, so that we're able to use it. And it was something that they pushed as well initially, but that's a key component to it. So not to say that, which is why I think it's interesting to put it this way, because it's always an evolution. It's not like, oh, this is the minimalist trend versus the maximalist trend. It's more like there's an evolution of all the innovations and the steps in the shoe industry. and it's linked to, yes, ideas, but also what is around and what is available as technologies.
That's great. And, I know I was initially drawn to the Hokas because of the foam and because of the cushioning and, this sense of vibrations being damped. That's what initially drew me to it. But then there is this meta rocker that you have. I'm curious in terms of shoe fit, because something we're looking at is scanning feet and then seeing how a person has actually selected their shoe. With the Hoka and the importance of the meta rocker, usually you go buy a pair of shoes, you figure out where your big toe and little toe are in the toe box. But is it more important to try to align the metatarsals with the meta rocker and buy the right length shoe based upon that, or how have you folks looked at that? Or
I would so it's a bit, well, yes, and well, it's a bit more complex than that. I would say that it's not. I don't have one answer. It's more what I want to say is that there's not like we're not trying to. Sometimes it's aligned, sometimes it's not. It depends on the purpose of the shoe. It depends on the rider experience we want to design. So just we tend to call it sometimes a late stage rocker or early stage rocker. So depending on when, like where you start the curve of the rocker shape, then it influences the way the shoe is riding. So for some shoes, the rocker will be more aggressive, and then it's not going to be aligned with your metatarsals. Some it will be. So it's not a generic rule of saying it should be aligned. It's more like on our side, depending on what we want to provide as an experience, then we fine tune it based on a length that is on the last. That is, so we know where exactly you decide depending on that what we do with the geometries. So this is where I might not be able to enter into the details because this is part of the secret sauce as well. Or let's say the knowledge we built through time, and we did some testing, and the way we also express our design or right characteristics. But yeah, this is the idea. It's not linked specifically to the metatarsal of the person.
That's great. So then, the craze right now, or the trend, is to do carbon plating inside the shoe. Maybe talk about that relative to the meta rocker, and or do you? I am wondering if the carbon plate is here to stay, or if or maybe it's something that may be tried out for a bit, and maybe it's not needed. I don't know.
Sure. Let me just grab a shoe. So yeah, it's been a trend for it started a few years ago now, and our main model is the Carbon X, and indeed, so just to put some context for everyone, there's two pieces of foams, and then in sandwich in between, it's a carbon plate. The idea of the insert is that on our side, it's definitely as you mentioned, there is an effect on the rocker, is that we define the rocker, and it's defined also with a shape. It helps to really maximize or it's designed to, let's say, provide this rolling effect that we have from the rocker, and then at higher speed, the idea is that you're gonna need to go faster, and these efficiency or running efficiencies are critical, and this helps. But this is where we focus more on what is the overall behavior of the shoe without having a stiffer compound, because running efficiencies are way more complex, and you'll know this well, and it's difficult to attribute the carbon plate to a specific running efficiency point. But overall, in general, this is to help the transition when people are getting tired when it counts in racing or at fast paces. And to your question of about is it here to stay? It's a good question. Right now, it's kind of a tool that is interesting, and it's the case in many industries. And being triathletes, that carbon is a material that makes a lot of sense in cycling, but in many other industries as well for gear and equipment. And the properties of carbon are great for like it's basically the lightest, one of the lightest components we have that has this characteristic performance. So I would say yes. I think to some extent it's going to be here for a while. It's been in footwear for a while already, used differently, but it's been there for a while. So I think yes. How, it's something that's interesting. It might evolve on the how, but is it here to stay? I would say yes.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's certainly amazing how quickly it came in. I think you're right that carbon fiber has worked its way into shoes in different places, but really has sort of taken off this last few years.
Yeah, and I think it's a good way to introduce the fact that it's not only like, it's not as simple as, oh, we have a material and this is what makes the shoe. It's like how you use it, what are the geometries, where you place it, and it's way more complex. So,
yeah.
Which is something that we can also that is applicable to foams. It's not like, I know sometimes for the general public, the marketing messages is like, oh, this shoe has this foam, this is the magic sauce, and then boom, this is the shoe. And I'm not naming any brand here, it's across the industry, but it's in reality a bit more complex than that. Each compound is actually, one piece is the material, but also it's how you use it, how you shape it. That is almost as important.
Oh, that's great. And something we're looking at is the influence of the speed that the person wants to run at in different shoes, because the materials will perform a little differently based upon speed, or they won't perform different, but they may have a different influence. So walking in a shoe versus running in a shoe, or running, a 5-minute mile versus an 8-minute mile. How have you folks looked at that shoe design for different levels of runners?
So this is a good question, because indeed, the materials are behaving differently depending on the constraints you put on them. And so I can speak to the midsole. The upper, it's not that easier, but in some ways it is, because you need to lock the foot, and then when it's for performance and speed. So you have different ways to do it, but ultimately it comes down to comfort. So is it locking you with comfort? And then if it's more of an easy run shoe, the solutions have been around for a long time. So there is a few innovations here and there in the materials and the way it's applied, but it's not something that is it's something that is well known in many cases. For the midsoles, this is where I think it requires a bit more testing and a bit more like some explorations. And the reality is that, as I mentioned, I will take the foams. It's not a secret. It's all over across the industry. There's, I would say, 4 main parameters that we are focusing on. That everybody is like resiliency, so the ability for the foam to restore some energy. Compression set, which is the ability for the foam to come back to its initial position after the usage. So it's the durability through time. And one of the other one is the density. So it's linked then to the weight of the foam, and then resistance to abrasion, which is on the surface. So that's kind of, there's additional ones, but it's the main ones that we can play with. And then depending on the formulas then, and these parameters, then we can assess which compounds are more suitable for a faster pace, for a heavier runner, a lighter runner, and all that. That's on the material side again. And then the way we design it and combine it together, it's more know-how and experience within the design team and the whole team. It's now 10 years of experience. But yeah, on the compound side, it's working mainly on these parameters, and then it's testing and making mistakes, or finding solutions that are close to be ready. But like, it's fine tuning. It's innovation is about testing and failing and testing again and finding the perfect one. This is where it connects well with the athletes. Just for the performance aspect, the athletes that we are sponsoring many athletes in many disciplines, should I say, from trail to triathlon to road to track. And having them on board is also super helpful because then we can test and give feedback, and then they are super precise on what they need, and they run a lot of mileage. So then we have a testing pool that is really nice, but it's only for the performance aspect because we are focusing on like all consumers. We are from like all the consumers, from the ones that are just jogging for a mile or even walking for a mile to the ones that are running 100 miles. But then we have different programs to test with the relevant consumers, but just for performance, as you were asking on this side, having the athletes helps a lot to fine tune all of this.
No, that's great. That gives some insight in terms of the process. In academics, we move so slow. We'll work on a project. We have to get IRB approval, and then, that takes some time. And then we got to practice our data collections, and then, we eventually do it. Then we have to analyze and publish it. It can take, 3 years sometimes from the time that we start a study to finishing it. But you folks are moving so fast with innovating. Maybe give a little bit of insight, because this would be new to everyone on the call here, in terms of how do you innovate quickly and have that time to let things sort of fail, learn, and then redo. I mean, what's your team like? How do you approach this?
I would say that you would be probably surprised by the size of the team, because relatively we're still a smaller brand than some of the big established ones. But I think it's more of a mindset of trials and errors. And I would say that coming from also the academic background, there's way less in-depth testing, like lab testing, that you might think. It's because the truth comes from the reality, and then as Al and Alex were mentioning earlier, we are based on the experience of the consumer. So having access to also in the end, the consumer is helping us a lot, and so there's a lot of subjective testing, and that's way easier to conduct, and that because then you don't have to focus on as many parameters, and it's not like fixed conditions and all that stuff. You can reach out to a variety of people right away, as long as you build the pool. We have this. That's the chance we have. We are connected to a lot of people in the field that are able to test. Subjective part that allows us to go quickly. And then it's about taking chances. If we test 10 options, and maybe there is first round has 8 that are not working, and then the 2 are interesting, and then we recombine, and that's kind of a fluid process. But and then on the other side, we have also studies that we would conduct with labs to understand a bit more in depth some concepts. But so that's a bit more rare, because it takes, as you mentioned, a bit longer. But the difference maybe with you guys is that we are not publishing. The intent is not to publish. So once we have the pool of data, and then we run through it, and we can work quickly actually through the data. We don't need to produce. I produce a PowerPoint for the teams inside like internally, but that's it. So I think that's saving a bit of time. But also, what I would say is that we have also different teams, which is why I'm working on innovation, and then the team that is working on like every day, should I say, next season, the next 2 seasons designs and developments. They're focusing on that, and then we have a team that's focusing on the platforms. So then, and they go at different paces because they have also different roles. That gives a bit more maybe perspective of the structure. Like that is that we have people that are connected to the consumer, the sales teams, to make sure that every single season, which is twice a year, we come with this collection for all our partners and consumers, and mainly the consumers first. But so it includes evolution of the current models, the colorways, and all that stuff. But this is their daily work. But on our side, we're just like trying a lot of things so that once that are super easy for us to integrate. So it's kind of it's not we study for 3 years and then we implement it. It takes another year, and then it takes 4 years in total. It's more like a continuous process where we work together, and then we are able to implement it. So back to your question, how are we able to to innovate so quickly and on a regular basis. I would say there is different things. It's easier when you're smaller in general in the industry. The bigger you are, the more there is. You lose a bit of time for good reasons because you're trying to be a bit more efficient with everyone. Second thing, specifically for Hoka back in 2010, it was against the trend. So when you don't have any competitors and you're like free to try, then it's easier in some ways. Now it's a bit different, and I would say it's a mindset, it's a culture as well, and saying that innovation comes first, and then I think it's being also focused on the consumer and always like if something. Yeah, we do it first and foremost for the experience of the consumer, and that sounds not very scientific, like specific in that context, but it's super important. Because then trying on the consumer is kind of the truth in the end, and if it works with them, then we go. If it doesn't, then we stop it. So I would say a lot of subjective more than objective testing.
Oh, that's great. But I love the mindset. That's not easy to create. So I think it's great that you're able to do that. And again, Hoka's, they came out and they led the way, and now everyone sort of follows what you've done. And so it's neat to see how this company has progressed. But we talked earlier about doing the field testing and the importance of that. And we do the lab testing, which is great because everything's controlled. But we recognize that we lose information by controlling so many things. When you're out running, you're turning, you're running up and down curves, you're starting, you're stopping, and we don't test that. So, but with wearable technology coming around, there's more and more opportunities to do that. Where do you see wearable tech coming in for evaluating or getting feedback on the shoes that you have?
I think it's huge, and it's part of the new world we're in that is very interesting for all of us. Is that there's we're using some sensors that we're able to put on the shoes and in various places depending on what we want to measure, and then it's easier because maybe there are, as you mentioned, some bias, or we have a less precise, or it could be better if it's in the lab, but it's way enough for us to get directions and to see differences. And what it does, I think, is that, as you mentioned, the fact that it's in the reality, in the real conditions, helps big time the subjective. So we are able to conduct the subjective and the objective testing at the same time, and it's easy to conduct. So I think it's huge, and we've seen these devices evolve, and working with some different partners, always in contact or providing new solutions there. And like in 5 years, this changed a lot, and now we have devices that are way more consistent. I think there's always the same problem. Something to be aware is that the value you're getting is sometimes not as accurate as it would be in the lab. But if the device is consistent, then you're able to compare. Yeah. That's also a key element to be maybe reactive. Sometimes it's like, while you are when you are in the lab, you probably take care a bit more of like the value itself. Is it representative of what's happening because you're describing what is happening? Sometimes for us, if we know that this is reproducible, and this is always this is consistent through time, the testing, then we know that we can compare. This is sometimes what matters most.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think the other part that we recognize in the lab is that sometimes people just run a little bit differently because they know they're being watched. Yeah. And when we tried to do some work with kids, that was really hard because we would tell them to run across the force platform, and then they would run in a way that they hit the force platform in a particular way. It was just really it was really an art form trying to get them to run normally, and it's not easy. So I do look forward to having more measurements outside that then we can try to match up with some of the data that we have. Yeah. So I want to make sure I give some time to some of the students here for asking some questions. So who has some questions from some of the projects that you have going on, let me do some quick introductions of some of the projects. Andrew, Dr. Craig Jones just got done with his dissertation on compression socks and running, looking at vibration of muscle, which is something I think is related to like the extreme cushioning type shoes. Mufaro is going to be looking at scanning the foot this summer and possibly looking at how people are picking sizes of shoes based upon a 3D scan. Sarah is starting a project on weight of shoes, in particular looking at what happens when shoes get wet and they get heavier. And then she's actually so saturated some shoes and measured how much the weight changes. And so she's going to look at basically disguising shoes of different weights and seeing what happens with people. Alina is doing a little bit more with biking and some balance work, but she is also looking at doing all three sports as well. And Borum is also looking at the preferred speed issue of different shoes, whether they be carbon plated or non-carbon plated shoes, and then seeing what speed people select. And Caitlin, I'm drawing a blank.
Still working on the exact thing, but I did want to look at footwear in terms of cycling specifically.
Okay, that's right. That's right. It was cycling. Yeah, thank you. Cycling and footwear pedal interface. So we are trying to cover the full range. And Alina's also doing some work on wetsuits and influence of wetsuits on core temperature and what. Okay, questions from you folks to the Hoka team.
I'll jump in just to, as my question is kind of piggybacking off of the last topic with wearable tech. As we see, wearable tech or technology gets smaller and less expensive, can you see a point where we get to maybe like smart shoes where we have a AI kind of shoe that learns an individual's response during running? I know we preach individuality in most of our kinesiology studies. We see that everybody's responding different. Do you feel like we can use the technology to get to a point where we may not have to shape a specific shoe to a person because it will do itself as they run?
Well, I think there's two parts of the question, at least in my answer. There will be two parts. I think, yes, it's possible now. We see it more and more, like technologies to the shoe, or at least the insole. A few brands developed it, and I think it's on the table of many R&D teams. So would it be possible to have shoes that are carrying these devices? Yes, it's kind of already the case. It works. Yeah, it's the beginning. Let's say it works in some cases, should I say? But it will be possible. Then what do you do with it? What will it become? Like, will the shoe be able to adapt itself, or will the data be used for for you to adapt your training? I think these are two different directions. So I would say to have a generic shoe that adapts depending on what's happening, it's something that seems very futuristic. I'm not saying never, because we never know, but I think there's many other parameters to have like a device inside that will be able to shrink or expand some materials depending on the need of. It seems to be a very complex construction. But the piece that is probably now on the radar of most people is like, what do you do with the data to adapt your running? So you have a virtual coach, or you're able to, after the run or even during the run, adapt your gait based on information you would get from the data. I think this is something that will evolve in that direction in some cases. But I think in many data-related technologies, and we are in this world of information and data now, it's more like, what do you do with the data versus are you able to capture the data? So, because eventually we'll be able to capture a lot of data in the shoot. I'm not worried about that for sure. It's like, what do you do with it, and then will it make sense? What will the consumer will do? Like, because once you realize after 10 runs that basically your stride is this way and it's very, very complex to change it, then what do you do with it? It's like, is there a value to buy a shoe that is way more or more expensive than for an information that once you have it, maybe you can check the difference? Well, so this is more like where I have questions and I have answers. But yeah, it's what do you do with the data, and is it something that will be for the brand a business model that is worth it in some ways? It's more connected than to the business, because yeah, if I mean, you guys all know that it's very difficult to change your stride, and it takes years for coaches to improve it and change it for even like for elite athletes. So yeah, I mean, I've done this on my side with more portable devices. Well, basically, once I had my set of data, then that was my stride. So this is more way, yeah. My answer is like, use it is going to be the key.
Thank you.
But I'm going to follow up on that a little bit, because that's great. I'm wondering where 3D printing may come in with shoes. You know, the outer sole is always something that goes the quickest. The shoe is probably still structurally fine, but the outer sole has just worn down enough that you start running a little bit differently because of that. Do you see anything where a 3D printed part or 3D printed outer sole, or that you can replace, or something like that?
I think this is something that has some potential. Again, very. It's kind of early in this type of technologies and a topic that everybody is evaluating. So I'm not going too much into details, but yeah, it has some potential for sure. What we see happening with 3D printing in many other industries, there is no reason that is not applicable to this one. The how and what makes sense and the constraints, I would say it still is a challenge today for the footwear industry, and it's not like specific to running, or more like it's softer materials. It's complex, and also today there's a lot of manufacturing in the process, and this is, if I take footwear in general, it's probably a bit late compared to some other industries. So there's some catch up here, but yeah, eventually it's going to be the case. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you.
At what cost? That's kind of the question. What's the business model? Is more it's back to this as well.
Right. That's great. Other questions?
So my name is Boram. I have two questions. So I tried Carbon X, and then personally, I feel like I can take more advantage of carbon plate when I run with heel strike rather than mid or forefoot strike. And I knew most of runners are heel striker, but have you tried or test the shoe design and foot strike pattern, or consider primarily heel striker runner?
So yes, we tried with various, all type of runners for that shoe, but for other ones as well. It makes sense in a way, because the plate is a full length plate, so then you're benefiting from it if you're landing in a heel, like all length of the shoe, while here you're benefiting from it only here. But I think it's tying back to the concept of Hoka. What we're trying to do is like trying to make you perform it better when you need it and when you're tired. And the difference is not like at the one step you'll be more efficient by maybe 1%. It's more like through time. The whole system, it works as a system, helps you to be more efficient when you need it. And so if you're fresh and you're a good runner that is a midfoot striker, maybe the first half or 70% of the race, you'll be more than fine, and you'll see, well, why do I need this? But then when it counts in the end, then you will have probably, when you start a heel strike, then you'll maybe get the benefit. So to your question, yes, we tested different things, different type of testers, and we have also other shoes like the Rocket X that we launched earlier this year at the Olympic trials that are maybe more suitable for some very elite runners. But yeah, it's kind of a good example of what we're trying to do. It's like when you need it the most, then you'll get assistance.
That's great.
Thank you. Can I ask one more question? It's
Yeah, sure.
a personal question, but I have a flat feet, but I run often. And then I haven't recorded and watched my running, but in general, flat feet runner tend to show the knee bogus. So what is shoe recommendation for those who flat feet? And I mean, Hoka shoes.
No simple answer here. Yeah, it's difficult because it depends. It depends what type of distance. Yeah, are you like for long distances, shorter distances? What surface? Are you pronator? Are you neutral? This is where it comes with a like we have different shoes for these, but then I would say in general, I don't think we have shoes specifically for flat feet. It's more like we have shoes for people that are neutral runners. Mating runners, and we have also for different surfaces and distances. But yeah, that's kind of difficult to answer specifically that question, not knowing more about what you do. Maybe Al, you'll be able to help here because you're the sales guy.
I think the other thing that, a lot of people use orthotics to try to build up the arch, and consequently, it does change the dynamic and the strike pattern of the footwear. But what we found a lot of times, especially if you look on the medical side, is we've got a lot of people wearing a shoe called the Gaviota, which gives a higher degree of stability. And so the question goes back to what Thibaut said is, are you a pronator, are you a supinator, and then what kind of impact? Because obviously we know pronation is good to a degree, and probably 30% of all runners pronate, and most of those are flat foot. So, so a lot of the solution comes from, all other things that you put in your shoe. The base nets in our shoes accommodate orthotics, and that's what we found. A lot of people will buy our shoes and then put their stability platform inside it and go with that.
Yeah, I'll add in. I think that doing the static measures of even like a flat foot does not always tell you how the foot's going to perform during running. And that's what makes it incredibly hard to figure out the right shoe. But that's also why you have so many different models, is that if you try one, and I contend you can almost tell right away whether or not that shoe's going to work for you. And then try another one and try another one. And unfortunately, it is a bit of trial and error, but and it goes back to what Andrew was saying of trying to add some AI to be able to learn and then maybe recommend a different type of shoe. But that's the future.
Yeah, well, today in that space, I would say it's more like recommendations from specialists. So if you have a doubt, you go to a specialty retail store that will have. They are not medical staff, but they have the expertise. They have a treadmill. They will record and provide at least their advice, their expertise. So that's what we have today.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I have a question. Sorry. First of all, thank you for taking the time out of your day to be here with us. So I personally run track and field, and I've struggled figuring out what the right type of shoe is for me. I'm more of a sprinter. It's a bit different. But my brothers are Hoka fans, and they swear by Hoka every day. I was constantly trying to convince me to buy a pair. I'm more interested in the fitting of the shoe exactly. I noticed you guys mentioned that it's based on, you guys create shoes based on the purpose of what the shoe is for, whether it's early stage rocker or an early stage rocker or late stage rocker. So do you guys actually do a scan of the foot prior to putting in the shoe? And how do you generalize that to a larger population? Because people are different. So Borum has flat feet. Somebody might have high arches. And how do you take a community so big and try and create that one shoe that can accommodate the most people? Is it through testing, or is that more hearing what people like, or how does that work?
Welcome to our world of footwear. No, that's actually, it starts from there. It's actually on my phone, so I don't have it here. You can find it online. It's more tying back to how shoes are built, and it all starts with the last. So the last is a piece of resin, what material is, but today it's usually resin that represents the volume of the shoe. And you start from there because basically there's dozens of measurements on the last. So the length, the ball girth, there's different. Every piece of the last you can change it, and this is basically the volume of material that you're using to build the shoe around. So then you have like the midsole, the bottom unit component, and the upper. But we first start with the last. It's like, what's the volume of what's all the dimensions of the last, and then to your question is like, so it's a complex field, but to do it in 30 seconds, I would say you need to first determine like what are the dimensions of the last, depending on the customer and on what you want to achieve with the shoe. But then you'll make assumptions. You generalize. You're like you're trying to have something that accommodates most of the people, unless it's a specific shoe that is designed for a very specific population. But in general, you're trying to accommodate the majority. So. And then once you have this volume, then you build this around. So, and then this is where it becomes complex, but depending on the material you're using, so if it's a knit, if it's a mesh, if it's whatever the yarn is, or the thickness of the material, then you build the last a bit differently. But this is the starting point. So then back to your question, how do we set it up? Database of there are database of population and like how this is evolving, and it could be also through specific testing and scanning that we would call it. But also there are experts in this field in scanning and in the database itself, knowing different populations and their characteristics of foot, and then also just the last itself, how to build the last depending on the properties you want to achieve. So it's a complex field, but yeah, it starts from this piece of resin. That if you tap last shoe in online, you'll find it and look what it looks like. It's very complex because we are playing with different soft materials that are also playing like a role there. You change the upper material on the same last, and then the fit perception is not the same. And different populations from the US, Europe, Asia, they have different. And so it's very complex to accommodate everyone. So if you're not lucky and you're on both sides of the curve, then it's kind of a problem. Often it's a problem. This is where brands they are trying to accommodate everyone, and then sometimes providing some additional sizes or width. So for example, for us, we have for our key shoes, we have a normal width and a wide width because some people have wide feet, but it's difficult to accommodate everyone. So which is why when people think, oh, I don't like this brand because it doesn't fit me well, or I don't like this style because it doesn't fit me well, it's logical. It depends on the style of the brand. Brand have key positions, so we make decisions, and this is our signature fit. And some models have specificities and stuff like that. So it's a big part of trying what works for you as well.
Right. Thank you,
John. I'm going to have to jump off. I do apologize. But I hope the conversation continues. I can't wait to see it recorded.
Yeah, thanks, Al. Really appreciate you helping set this up. I mean, that was your brainchild of doing this. So thank you.
You bet. My pleasure. You know, the one last thing that I would say in response to Thibaut's response, and also Mafaro's question, is we've spent a lot of time and energy educating retail staffs on our product, on how to sell our product. And that's been an incredible investment for the brand, but it's paid off amazingly. So, you know, we've got over 30 field marketing reps that literally that's all they do is educate and make sure that people know how to sell the Hoka brand. And obviously once they get it, then they understand how to make the recommendations that Thibaut said to Mafaro. Let's try a different style because this may fit your foot better. Because the old saying in the industry is not every shoe fits every foot. And I think that's really the piece that I'll leave you guys with. And it was delightful to get to talk to you guys.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks, Al.
You bet. See ya.
And I trust Thibaut at this point to carry on the conversation, but I'm a little bit late for another call. So
okay. Yeah. Sorry we got started late. So thanks, Alex.
No worries at all. Thank you guys for having us, and this has been great. And yeah, Thibaut, take it away.
Thanks, Alex.
All right. Thanks, Alex. All right, then Thibaut, if we could just get I know we got a couple more questions.
No worries. I have like 24 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to look at either Sarah or Caitlin. Caitlin, I've got your question for you because that's something that you and I talked about is the emergence of triathlon formats that are short in distance, and therefore these athletes are biking in their running shoes. And I don't know if that's hit Hoka yet in terms of, I know it's probably still a niche market, but is that anything that's crossed your desk in terms of a shoe that can be used to bike, not obviously long distance, maybe 10 miles, 20K, but then get off quickly and run?
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that as an individual and fan of sports and not triathlon, but well, I'm fan of watching triathlon. But yeah, like maybe I don't know if it's a place to name brands, but like the Super League formats or all these stuff that are getting shorter, and then we've seen it. I don't know if it's an opportunity or a business now, as you mentioned, but I'm happy to take a question on it if you have one.
But yeah, do you see any shoe design specifically for a swim, bike, run, where the person's biking and running in the same shoe?
So there are some solutions that are, I know, evaluated by other brands just by looking at the patents that are now appearing. So I'm aware of at least one brand that is kind of working on that. But
okay.
And the challenge is, it's a complex construction. That's first. Just to think about it, there's many constraints. But at the same time, I don't know if it's a business model it's an opportunity right now for us. Just to put it this way, yeah. So to your question, yes, this is something that we see evolving, but this is not something that we are working on specifically now, should I say.
Good, thank you. Sarah, how about a weight question?
Yeah, I know you guys do what you can to keep your shoes as light as possible with all the cushioning. I'm a huge fan. I saw them for the first time in 2013 at the World Championship in Hawaii and thought they looked ridiculous. And then in 2015, I was like, all right, I'm going to give them a try. I got some Cliftons and loved them and did some Bondis too. And I just tore the crap out of the bottoms though. So I had to switch to Challenger ATRs, even though I do a little bit of trail running, but mostly road running, but at least they hold up better. But I mean, I know the disclaimer, Dr. Mercer, but it's done wonders for me as far as keeping me injury free. So they work for me. Anyway, like Dr. Mercer said, we're looking at shoes getting wet and the effects of preferred running speed. And you can't choose sometimes whether your shoes get wet if it's raining or you're running through puddles, or if you're in a hot race and you're getting water, you're dumping water on yourself to stay cool. You just take the hit with the shoes for the most part. Do you have anything with drainage systems that can keep it? I know Zoot had some triathlon specific shoes with holes in the bottoms for a while. I'm not sure if they still do. But anything like that where, I know when you squish, usually it kind of comes out the mesh and everything, but I just wondered if you've looked at that at all.
Yeah, it's an important topic actually, and it's so quick answer: no, we don't have any drainage system per se, like complex system built into the midsole. But it's an important topic, and we are monitoring. We are working on it for different reasons. Triathlon is one, but also trail running. When we speak about ultra distance, just like if your shoe is getting wet after 10 miles and you need to do another 90, and then you're adding 50 grams each foot. Well, then just the efficiency and then just the moistures and stuff. So it's a key performance element, especially for the longer distances. So it's something we're looking at mainly from an upper material standpoint. And I actually conducted a study a few years ago now internally to just work on. The idea for us was to try to evaluate two elements. It's like the drainage, the ability for the material to just evacuate water and or to absorb water and to evacuate water. It was the two pieces. It's like basically putting the shoes into water for a certain period of time, but long enough so that then you measure the differences. So some are taking 20% of their weight, some are taking 120. So then you have kind of a base, and then the drainage effect, which is now that I'm running with it for maybe 5 minutes, how does this evolve and where does it plateau? Because there's always water that stays inside. So we're doing this, and I was the first. I designed the protocol, and I was the one being sick for a week because I spent an afternoon with feet in the water. But joke aside, I mean, it was very interesting for us to evaluate. Like some shoes, depending on their constructions, they would take only 30% of their weight in addition, so 130% of the weight. But then there were like some other ones that would take 70%, and just understanding why. And then some of them, and this is not always linked to then what's happening when you train them or continue to run with them. So that's something we're measuring. We're trying to measure, and then it's really linked to the material. And this is where, for example, we designed, so it's a trail shoe here. It's a speed goat, but it's the Evo speed goat. But specifically, we worked for this shoe, and then another one on like the material itself that is resistant enough, but also doesn't retain any water through time. So it's more like exploration around materials than drainage systems that are a bit complex. I know some other brands. You mentioned Zoot, but I'm not speaking too much about other brands, but like it's well known. So Salomon developed a swim and run shoe that has also channels to evacuate water. The challenge you have is that you need to make sure that you connect the shoe with the outside, I mean through the midsole, and make sure that the water actually comes into the channel. I think it's easy to say, well, I'm going to drill my shoe and then it's going to work, because, well, first you have an insole, so you need to pass the insole, and then what actually the way of the water to come out is kind of a complex. There's the complexity of engineering it, but also the actual efficiency. So I think what people are doing the most now is working on the upper, for the upper to just retain water or evacuate it.
Yeah, it almost needs like a check valve. So when you press down on it, it opens up the valve and squirts the water out, and closes when you're not.
I think the technologies are evolving from a material standpoint, but also from like coating and applications and treatments in general. So that's it's hydrophobic, and But we are working on it, but not from a drainage system perspective, or not now at least.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thibaut, this has been great. You've been so generous with your time, and thank you for doing this.
Sure.
It is great for us to get together at the academic side and talk with you about shoes, and I'd love to be able to do this again as we continue to collect some data and bounce ideas off you.
No, pleasure. I mean, it's always. I'm passionate about shoes, and we all are at Hoka, and that's something that we do. And we could do this for hours. And indeed, I have some other things to do, but so do you. So appreciate the time as well here. And any conversations, questions you might have in the future, don't hesitate to reach out. And then yeah, I mean, we're trying to make this evolve and learn more. I think it's there. It's like either from the if you're on the academic side or on the industry side, especially in development, trying to understand how to make running better and more enjoyable for more people.
That's great. And maybe we will get you to Vegas one day now that we're getting close to opening up. So
yeah. Well, I heard it's beautiful. Yeah, the Red Rocks are amazing. So I want to see that for sure.
All right, great. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. So thanks again one more time. That really appreciate it.